Bitcoin was around 2011, and then really got into Bitcoin and crypto with some kind of vengeance around 2012. Initially, kind of looking at Bitcoin, I was curious and interested in how the double spend problem had been solved in a permissionless way. Being a bit of a tech nerd, that was really interesting. And then also started to appreciate the economic side of things and how disruptive this technology could become over the years.
Okay, awesome, Dan. Thanks for the introduction. Before we go into the project, I was looking on CoinGecko. It's the 82nd largest market cap project, but on Coin Market Cap they seem to downgrade you. I was wondering why they do that with a lot of projects, but at least you're correctly in the 82nd place largest market cap on CoinGecko.
Yeah, it's a little there's a little bit of a dance going on with Coin Market Cap at the moment. We're a bit in that funny position, I think, where we've got a lot of people that follow the project that are kind of diamond hands, for want of a better word. But we've kind of stayed under the radar a lot to just concentrate on building. So there's not a great deal of buyers, but there also isn't a great deal of sellers. And CoinMarketCap obviously wants us to improve that before they list us. So, I mean, it's fair enough, right? So yeah, it's just a little bit of a quagmire, but it's fine.
Fair enough, Dan. Yeah, so maybe you can give us an introduction for the spaces today to everyone about the Radix project, and then we can delve in deeper into some of the Dapps, the platform, and the blockchain level.
Sure.
Blockchain.
Sure. So Radix started initially Radix was just me in my home office dabbling around with Bitcoin and trying to figure out some of the maybe long-term issues that Bitcoin might face, such as scalability, miner centralization, all these things that I'd kind of identified as maybe bumps in the road when I was kind of digging into the tech and figuring out what it does and how it does it. And then I got some ideas on things. So initially it was how can I contribute to Bitcoin? But then the scale of the stuff that I was looking at just kept growing and growing, and it made more sense to kind of spin off into a separate project. And I had a very concrete list of things that I wanted to try and achieve, and took my time with it. And we've spent 10 years at this point building this platform, trying new ideas, trying things that were maybe a little bit controversial in terms of solving what's now known as the trilemma. And now here we are with a fairly conservative but solid roadmap for the next couple of years. So we started off with our Olympia launch just over a year ago, which is a fairly basic network, but it sets the foundation for everything that's to come. Then next year, we have smart contracts rolling out onto that platform via Scrypto, which we're going to talk about. And then in 2024, we go full send with our sharded, linearly scalable L1 called Shiba.
Okay, awesome, Dan. So yeah, maybe if we can start with one of the Dapps. It was really interesting to me. You're importing Twitter onto the blockchain. You can search for users over 1,000 followers. So are you looking to, is that mainly going to be used to be keeping a record of everything tweeted by influential people?
I see. Yeah. So Cassie, which is what you've been looking at, that's a research stroke prototype network prior to Xi'an. So where I currently sit in the company at the moment is I'm kind of staying about 2 years ahead of the team, figuring out what we need to do to get to our roadmap, catching bullets, figuring out the hard problems, figuring out the minor problems, etc., etc. And that research network, Cassandra, got to such a point where it was like, well, you know what, this is essentially a slimmed down version of what Xi'an will be. So let's build some cool stuff on it and showcase a little bit. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of what a truly scalable L1 crypto protocol is capable of, right? Now, that doesn't mean to say that what I'm doing in terms of demos are maybe economically viable and stuff, but it's just, you know, if you wanted to do this in this way, then you could do it on the technology that we're building.
Oh, I see then. That's great. And you've got the Radix as well, which is a YouTube clone. What are you planning to build around that?
So these demos, the purpose of them is to show that the technology stack that we're developing can support, one, high throughput. It can support complex applications at a high throughput. So, you know, Twitter and YouTube clones and all these kind of Web3 applications are quite complicated underneath the hood, especially in Web3. You have to build them a little bit differently than you would, say, on Web2, right? But from the outside looking in, these are applications that everybody's familiar with, right? Everybody knows how to use Twitter. Everybody knows how to use Radix. So the idea is that when you use these demonstrations, you're very familiar with what it's doing, but hopefully you get why it's important underneath the hood, right? And the third thing that it's demonstrating is that actually you can do all these things and also have extremely large data sets on there as well. So at the moment, the Twitter demonstration where I'm importing tweets and videos and images and all that stuff, it's currently ticking at about 90 terabytes worth, which is all stored on Ledger or on chain. So it's, you know, it's quite a powerful demonstration to show, look, this is where we could be, right? This is where the industry could be. This is where Radix could be. This is where the space could be going to.
Awesome, Dan. So that's all, like say, building and looking to the future. Where you're going to have the level 1 blockchain, Cassandra. Could we go into some details about Cassandra and how it compares to other blockchains? Sure.
Yeah. So Cassandra is the precursor to Shiba, which is what's on our roadmap, and it was started, you know, as a means to, okay, let's just build a prototype and make sure that all of our tech is solid, all the theory that we've got is solid. But what's interesting with Cassandra is that there's a lot of novel stuff in there that builds on top of Cerberus, which is our consensus white paper that we published about a year ago and is currently going through peer review and should be published in Q1, peer reviewed in a journal. But essentially what the Cerberus paper gives you is details on, okay, this is a cool rocket engine, but you still need a rocket around it, right? So you can think of Cassandra as, okay, let's take this rocket engine and then let's build the rocket around that engine. So we've got the body, we've got the fuel tanks, we've got all the control surfaces, we've got the payload stuff, so we can take things to orbit, etc., etc. And so that was the intention for the research network. Okay, what would the rocket look like? We've got the engine. So there's a lot of different bits and pieces in there that are quite novel. So I mean, I don't know how deeply technical I could go on this space, but essentially, one of the core pieces of Cassandra, aside from Cerberus, is the actual consensus mechanism that validators come to agreement locally before they process these cross-shard transactions. Now, typically with consensus mechanisms, you have one of two choices. You can either go for probabilistic safety, which is Bitcoin, right, where you've got a probability that somebody can't attack the network and change things. And then on the other side, you've got deterministic safety, which is where once something is committed to the network, it's final, right? But the drawback is that if you go for probabilistic safety, nothing's ever really 100% committed. There's always a chance that somebody can go and change things. But what probabilistic safety gives you is a liveness guarantee. And a liveness guarantee means that no matter what's happening, progress will always be made, right? New blocks will be created, new transactions will go onto the blockchain, even if your safety guarantee is quite weak. If you go for an explicit safety guarantee via determinism, you completely lose the liveness guarantee. So one of the things that is in Cassandra is this kind of hybrid of those two consensus mechanisms, which is extremely kind of integrated in pipeline. So you get the best of both worlds, which is quite important, because if you lose liveness, then what you currently kind of have to do in a lot of cases is pick up the phone and call all the validators and say, hey, we've got a problem, can you restart, right? Which is why these very high scale protocols that use deterministic safety, they only ever have a relatively small number of validators, so that they're not very decentralized. Hopefully that
Okay.
wasn't too technical for you guys.
I'm not a technical guy, but there are people on the call. Noah's a very knowledgeable guy on level 1 blockchains. So with level 1 blockchain, I'm wondering how many developers you've got working on it. Is it mainly in-house, or have you got like volunteer developers that are helping in the community as well for the future with Cassandra?
Yeah, it's kind of nicely tiered. So on the research side, it's mainly me. And we work a lot with University of California, Davis as well to kind of vet the research that I'm doing. So very small team on the research side, kind of moving forward. Then we have 2 teams on the builders and the network side. So the builders are responsible for all the kind of Scrypto stuff, and the network team is responsible for fixing issues with our current network, Olympia, and also developing the next stage of the rollout, which is Babylon next year. And then past that, those guys will then take what I've built with Cassandra and build a production-ready version of that, which will be Shiba.
I see.
So,
yeah. So
in total, there's probably we're growing a bit at the moment, but there's between 20 and 30 developers at least.
Awesome, Dan. And yeah, let's go into Scrypto for developers. I saw that Babylon release is going to be Q1 2023. It launched on the 28th of July 2021 last year. So I was wondering how it's been going with Scrypto. Has developer feedback been positive? What have developers been building on the platform?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll give a little bit of an overview of what Scrypto is first, and then get to that. So, I mean, one of the problems we have in this space at the moment is that all the kind of smart contract languages are quite fragile in the way that, we've had a lot of hacks, we've had a lot of issues, right? We've all seen all of this news over the past, number of years now, actually. And what Scrypto is it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about, okay, how would you build a smart contract? How would you build a intelligent decentralized application so that 1, it's more secure, and 2, it's easier for developers to develop on, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, if you take a Solidity application and you look at the smart contract code, there's a lot of stuff in there. And your developer that wants to build his application has to make sure that the smart contract code is good. And the more code you have, then the more chance there is for bugs, or you're going to get something wrong, or you're going to make a mistake, and then some eagle-eyed hacker can come in and drain your liquidity pool or whatever, right? And so developers currently spend probably more time making sure that their smart contract code is correct than they do actually building the application, which is the wrong way around, right? Now, if you could say give developers tools where they're spending maybe only 30% of their time actually making sure that their smart contract code is good, and then 70% of their time actually building the application, then you would have more vibrant applications, right? The developers are spending more time thinking about what they want to build. They spend more time thinking about new features, new classes of applications entirely that we haven't seen before, et cetera, et cetera. And the other part is if you can shift that paradigm, if your language enables a more asset-oriented development experience, then your developers then they produce inherently more secure code. Now that sounds a bit cryptic, so let me explain. So in Solidity at the moment, it's kind of it's your like traditional language, right? You've got variables and you can pass them into functions, and those functions do something, and then it spits something out, and then you can use that. But the languages that are being used for smart contracts at the moment, they don't really have any notion about what is a token, what is an asset, what is a transfer, right? It has no concept around what these things are. And your application developers, they have to program in the logic that defines what can happen when you do a token transfer, right? Or you mint an NFT or whatever. The developer is responsible for building that code that tells the state machine that runs the smart contract what can and can't happen with these tokens. But if you can shift to a more asset-oriented approach, then the smart contract language already has that built in, right? It knows what can and can't happen with a token or a transfer or a mint of an NFT. So your developer doesn't have to write hundreds or thousands of lines of code to ensure that those constraints and rules are actually followed. So what Scrypto is a kind of combination of all these things, right? Asset-oriented programming language. It understands what tokens are, what NFTs are, etc. It's more suited to building DeFi applications than you would have with Solidity. And with that, you just get an inherent increase in security immediately. And it's easy to develop on as well.
Awesome. And yeah, going back to, I think I was asking about, what's been happening with the developers, the feedback you've been getting over the last year.
Yeah, I was doing you a rundown of what Scrypto is first, right? Yeah, of course. So yeah, we do quite a lot with the developers. So for maybe 8 or 9 months now, we've been having like little hackathons, and developers have been getting early releases of Scrypto and being able to play with it in like sandbox environments and stuff. And we've had a lot of kind of backwards and forwards with developers on feedback. What did you like? What was clunky? What didn't work very well? And just a lot of interaction with the developers that will hopefully go on to build on our ecosystem when Scrypto is launched with Babylon. And so it's constantly being refined, constantly being improved, better tool chains, better language definitions, all this kind of stuff. Because like a key part of our mission at the moment is, if we bring developers on and they like what we've developed, then they're more likely to stay and develop on the Radix network. And developers that have built applications, hopefully users will follow them because they'll be promoting what they've built on Radix. And so they'll be promoting to their customer base, and those customer bases will then start to use Radix and find all the other cool things in the ecosystem that we've got.
Awesome, Dan. And I see you've got Radix developer discussion Telegram as well with over 1,600 members. So if there's any developers on the call, do people come in and ask questions about the present tech and future tech, discussions and feedback in there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, please do join. We've got quite a comprehensive set of documentation as well, especially when you're considering that this stuff is still very much under development. We do try and spend as much time on documentation as well, because obviously if we want feedback from developers, then them knowing how to use this stuff is obviously kind of paramount, right? They need to know how to build things. So the documentation is pretty good as well. So yeah, just join. If you're a developer, join, have a play, see what you think. There's loads of documentation and stuff for you to read. You can download tool chains and sandboxes you can play around in, and we'd love to hear your feedback.
Awesome, Dan. And let's go into it for investors. You've got XRD, EXRD tokens. How's that work in the ecosystem? And you've got stake Radix as well in the Radix desktop wallet. How can investors get involved? And how does the staking work for investors?
Sure. So EXRD is essentially a wrapped version of XRD. So the people who hold XRD can take advantage of a lot of the DeFi stuff that's available in Ethereum. This was kind of, it acts a little bit as like a stopgap, right, until we get to Babylon. So you may have XRD, but you want to go and do something with it that's DeFi related. So you can just wrap it and go over to the Ethereum ecosystem, do whatever you need to do, and then you can come back later. So EXRD and XRD are essentially the same. It's just one's a wrapped version. And then staking, if you've got XRD, then the way that our current implementation is set up is we're using hot stuff consensus currently with a delegated proof of stake system. So there's 100 validators that are in the set, and just as you would expect with delegated proof of stake, you can stake to those validators, and you will get a portion of the rewards that those validators receive for being validators and ensuring that the network is running well and healthy.
I see. And how can you become a validator? Would there be like a minimum amount of tokens you need to hold to set that up yourself?
So anybody can become a validator. So you can just get some hardware, and you can register that machine as a validator. You put some stake to it yourself, and then if you're offering favorable terms around say the fee that you're going to charge on the stake that is pledged with you, then you go out and promote your validator, and if you get enough stake, you'll move into the top 100. And on the next epoch, you will then become part of the active validator set, and somebody will drop off into position 101, for example. So it's there's no kind of like federation, or you have to send us an email to ask permission. You can just spin up a validator, stick some stake on it, and if you've got enough stake to get into the top 100, then you'll be a validator and get rewards.
Awesome, and it's available on a lot of exchanges. I see Bitmart, MEXC, they're one of our partners, Whitebit, Gate.io, KuCoin. So there's lots of places you can buy the XRD token. That's great.
Yeah, we're doing quite an aggressive exchange growth campaign at the moment as well. So I expect that to increase quite a bit more over the next 3 to 6 months.
Awesome. And you've got the desktop wallet and hardware wallet. What features are available there for investors?
So the wallet at the moment is it's fairly basic, but it's functional. Again, it complements just what we wanted to do with Olympia, which was, okay, let's just get a good foundation out there. So in the desktop wallet, you can send transactions, you can attach messages to transactions, which can be encrypted or not, and then you can manage your staking to validators, and unstake, stake, draw down, withdraw, etc. And it also supports other token types as well. So one of the interesting things that we wanted to have, even in this initial kind of bare bones release, was tokens that are native to the platform. So it's been very important for us. So like with Ethereum, you've got the Ethereum token, and then any other tokens are like a smart contract, which is the ERC20 or the ERC7 something. I always forget the number, which was updated recently. But on Radix, like different token types are native to the protocol. So it just makes everything a lot more streamlined from a developer experience already. If you want to build some simple applications against the API endpoints, you don't have to worry about, okay, is this a real token? Is this something else that's implemented in a smart contract? Everything's native.
I see that. And we're in the bear market. It's been quite a terrible year for crypto. These large central exchanges imploding, and so I'm wondering what partnerships you've been building. It's a great time to sort of build. It's a bit quieter, there's a bit less chaos for projects, running all over the place. Obviously, crypto is quite chaotic, but I'm wondering if you've been making a lot of partnerships over the last 6 months.
I mean, we're always talking to other projects, talking to interesting service providers that can help us to build the ecosystem. Actually, for us over the past month or so, that's actually slowed down because of the current market conditions, right? Everybody's running around like crazy trying to figure out if they've been FTX poisoned or not. So those discussions have actually slowed, which is understandable, right? Like the markets are bleeding like crazy, and any project that's worth its salt is trying to figure out what it's going to do. But I mean, we've got such a lot of kind of infrastructure to get in place for Babylon and beyond as well. I mean, like we have a guy, 2 guys actually, that are just responsible for partnerships 24/7. So hey, we're going to need this for Babylon, and we're going to need to have this available, and we're going to need this infrastructure just in case it doesn't pop up naturally. So he's kind of responsible for running around and sorting all that kind of stuff out.
Okay, great. And let's go back to that, the public network, the Radix public network. You're looking at the Babylon release next year. What's going to be expanded there? I think it's coming Q1, is it? Like the first few months?
Q2 coming next year. Yeah. So next year we've got a beta release in Q1, where essentially it will be, the main net, but it will be a test network. So developers that have been using the sandbox and the alpha network to build prototypes of applications they want to build or services they want to deploy and stuff, there will be an actual proper feature complete test net beta net available that they can go and deploy these things on, and just kind of do your usual stuff, right? Your unit integration testing, all that kind of stuff. Tidy up any minor issues you might have, fix bugs, do some last minute tweaks and things. But they'll be able to run it on a proper network with validators, consensus, all this kind of stuff. And then in Q2, that's when the Babylon network itself will land. And the main feature for the Babylon network is Scrypto smart contracts.
Okay, awesome. And just let's go over, say, the next quarter, what you're planning around the marketing to expand Radix, to more investors and to developers to come and join and build things on the Scrypto?
So we've actually got quite a huge event planned next month called RadFi, and RadFi is kind of like it's a big showcase we've put together. A lot of the team, so Piers, Matt from product, Russ, the CTO, and a bunch of other people have put together these really cool, detailed, informative presentations in a nice studio. To explain, what our vision is, what is Scrypto, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, things around, self-custody, which is a hot topic right now, right? And how do we make that easier, and how is Radix trying to make that easier in terms of the wallets and all of that kind of stuff that we're building, and how does that integrate with all of the interesting tools for Scrypto? So if you really want to go on a bit of a journey and get radicalized, then you should definitely sign up to the RadFi newsletter, which I will post a link to in the Whalecoin chat after, if anybody's interested. And that's landing on the 8th of December. So it should blow your mind. And if it doesn't, you may be missing a bit of fundamental information about this space in general, because there's a lot of stuff in there that will give a really clear picture of what it is we're trying to do over the long term.
Awesome. Yeah, and I was wondering whereabouts are you based, if that's sort of public knowledge, and are you traveling around down south to London? Are you mainly in the north, and then are you going to conferences, crypto conferences, and networking with people that way?
Yeah, so I'm based up in the kind of Midlands of England, where most of my day-to-day happens. Then we have an office down in London, which is where kind of like the bulk of the UK based staff are, kind of HR, ops, some marketing, etc. There's an office down in London, and then most of our team are then kind of remote located around the globe, so pretty much on every continent, which is pretty cool culture wise. In terms of conferences, I'm actually going to my first one in December in London, and I haven't been to a conference for nearly 3 years, I think it is, because me and my wife had a little boy, and he's had various kinds of complications since forever, but he's getting better now. And then COVID came as well, so I'm going to be doing my first conference in December, which I'm very much looking forward to. But Piers has been carrying that torch for the past couple of years. He's always jetting off somewhere, some conference. We were in Web Summit not too long ago, over in Vegas a little while back as well. We do consensus pretty much every year, so we do get around quite a bit.
Awesome, Dan. Well, yeah, it's been a crazy few years with COVID and everything. It's put me off going to conferences and
yeah, fair chance.
And I'm glad, yeah, your son's doing well, and things are looking bright for the future. Let's go over to Twitter Space questions. I think we've got a few people with hands up. Aisha, you had a question for Dan at Radix. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. I have a few questions. So moving to my first question, I was wondering, when any developer is deploying modules which contribute towards the network's code repository, is the code auto-scanned by Radix engine for any bugs and errors, so that developers have to remove or fix the errors or bugs in order to deploy code on Radix network? And how easy is it for developers to remove bugs when using crypto language?
Okay, good questions. So the first one, we have the tool chain should take care of most of the kind of simple mistakes you can make, right? And Scrypto is a variant of Rust, and Rust has built in a lot of kind of guardrails so that developers can't do the kind of common simple mistakes that would lead to, like things like smart contract failures or exploits and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that's just built in there already that should mitigate a large portion of those kind of issues. Obviously, there is always a way to write code that fails, and you can't catch all of those kind of edge cases. It's frankly impossible to do that. But if you can put in some simple kind of protections and guardrails, and your choice of language also has compiler-based protection as well, so it won't even compile if a lot of these kind of simple-ish mistakes you can make, if it doesn't compile, you can't deploy it, if it won't run. That should go a long way to helping improve the quality of the applications and reducing the number of exploits that happen. And an appendix to that as well is that you can go and look at any smart contract code that is on the ledger in the same way that you can with Ethereum. So I know that smart contracts that are deployed on Ethereum, they're open source, people review them, they comment on them, they file bug reports, etc. So it's not unreasonable to think that the same kind of stuff would happen here as well. You would have people that go in and check the smart contract code, kind of like a community audit, I guess. And on the second question of updating, you can deploy updates to the ledger. So if you kind of think about how GitHub has like version numbers for things, you can do the same thing here. So I've got a bug, I need to push an update. I can push that update, and there's like a historical sequence of updates by version number that you can go and check them and audit them. And oh yeah, this application, this component, this blueprint, whatever, was updated, and I can see the changes that happened, etc., etc.
Understood. Thanks for the great explanation. So moving to my next question, I want to know, how is Radix sharding different from Ethereum sharding, which they will be implementing in future?
That's a deep and long question. So I'll try and give you an ELI 5 so that I'm not here for 3 hours. But if you do want to learn more about this, then obviously anybody can just hit me up, and I'm happy to have a conversation. So the way that we do sharding is kind of fundamentally different to the way that everybody else thinks about doing it, at least as far as I've seen right now. And the real key to this was, instead of having shards where they're dynamic, right? So you start off with 2 shards, and then when those shards are saturated, you move to 4. And then when those shards are saturated, you move to 8. Or you have explicit shards, or otherwise known as subnets or side chains, that are just specific for particular application classes. What if instead you just have a huge shard space, and you organize the validators in the network instead that can move around this shard space? And that brings with it a large number of benefits, because if you think about, you've got a bunch of transactions on a particular shard, and then that shard, say, has to be split into 2 because it's saturated. You then got a lot of complexity around, okay, well, where does this particular transaction go? Does this stay on shard 1A, or does this go to shard 1B? And how will everybody agree that that's where it's supposed to go? And how do the clients then find that information for that transaction if it's moved? Do they know where it is? Do they need to be told? What's the complexity of all this kind of stuff? But if you fix your shard space and just make it insanely large so that it's more than sufficient of kind of indexing everything, then you never need to, you'd have to bother with that complexity. All you then got to do is just move validators around. So you will have a set of validators that are responsible for a portion of that shard space. And as and when demand increases, you can just shrink the portion of that shard space that a particular set of validators are responsible for. So you don't actually move anything. You just say, okay, we were serving 20% of this, but now we're going to serve 10% of this, and some new validator set is going to take over the 10% that we aren't now responsible for. But you have deterministic addressing. Nothing ever moves. It's always in the same place. It's always in the same slot. So everybody in the network always knows where to go, who has it, who should have it, where it lives, as do your clients.
Okay, it makes me clear now a bit, not completely.
Yeah, it's a big rabbit hole. So hopefully that captures probably the key point of what's different, and the pros, and the pros that provides us, and allows us to build with much less complexity. But like I say, if you want to know more detail, then feel free to send me a DM.
Yeah, sure, I'll DM you. Okay, I was wondering, is the learning curve for Scrypto language more easier as compared to Solidity?
Yes. So there's kind of two learning curves, right? So the first learning curve is if you don't know Rust, then you need to get familiar with Rust, because Scrypto is kind of based heavily upon the Rust foundation. But if you already know Rust, then you can kind of skip that part, because you already know most of the language syntax and how it goes together and what the fundamental properties of the language are and stuff. And the second part is, again, easier, because the way that you manage your tokens, your assets and stuff on Scrypto, it's very well defined. There's a small number of primitives that deal with your tokens, called vaults and buckets. You don't need to worry about the definitions of them so much right now, but the primitives that you work with is a very tight, small set, and the number of calls that you have to make to manage those assets is greatly reduced as well. There's a small set of, like, say, that they're a bit like kernel system calls, and everything that you want to do in terms of managing your assets on the ledger can be encapsulated by those primitives and by that set of system calls, essentially. Now, if you want to go a level higher than that, then you can do a lot more, right? And the example that I kind of use is that, let's say that you've got something and there's some constraints around it, right? So you've got a particular primitive, and it can only contain a value between 0 and 100, yeah? And that's one of the primitives, and there's some system calls that you would make to push that information on chain, and then some system calls that you would make to read it off and lock it and do some manipulation with it. But above that layer, in the Rust environment, you can come up with any kind of different manner that you want to calculate a number between 0 and 100. So long as when you push it to ledger, it's within those constraints, then you're all good. So there's kind of a low level and a high level component to it. So you can do complex activities at the smart contract layer in order to do compute, but then when you actually try and push it to ledger, it's very tightly constrained. So if you've made a mistake, it will just fail. The consensus won't happen, it will get rejected. So overall, the learning curve is less.
All right, glad you are here, because I'm learning a lot from you. Thank you so much. Okay, last
No
thing
problem.
from me. I want to know, have you obtained patents for innovative technology that you are using for Radix network, like for Cerberus consensus or other specific technologies developed for Radix?
So no, we don't have any patents on the current technology stack. We did go down that avenue with some previous technology that we developed that we're not using. But that was extremely time consuming, and it didn't really in the end fit with what it was that we wanted to do. So our current tech stack, it's kind of just secured by your usual copyright stuff, right? So we've published a paper that publishes out that paper's out in the public domain. We've got a license on the technology. If you want to use that technology, then there's a license associated with it. And the same with the software code as well. It's all open source. There's a software license associated with that open source code. So just following the more traditional kind of protection that you would see in crypto.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering all my questions.
No problem.
Okay, sorry, I just lost my screen there a second. Yeah, we'll go to more questions shortly. We've got lots of hands up, Dan, but I was wondering, is the Radix team building educational resources for new investors as over the next few years we're going to go more mainstream in crypto?
Educational as in how do you get crypto? How do you manage your crypto, self-custody, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, around sort of how, if you're a new investor, how you could purchase Radix and use your wallets, and also in general crypto as well. Yeah, if you're offering educational resources there.
Yeah, we definitely will. Yeah, for sure. I mean, much of that is part of our focus for where we're moving to, right? Like, how do you make this easier for people? How do you make it so that anybody can look at this and be not daunted or intimidated by, I've got to have a hardware wallet, I've got to store a seed phrase, I've got to keep it secure somewhere, I've got to do all this stuff that I don't understand, and then I'm going to put my money there, and if I've done any of those steps wrong, then I'm going to lose my money, right? That's a massive point of friction for this space as a whole going mainstream, because most people outside of our little bubble, they haven't got the time to learn about all this stuff, right? They're busy with their lives. They've got jobs and children and hobbies and partners and families and stuff, right? And they just, after doing all that every day, they just haven't got the time to then go home and sit on Google and figure out how the hell to use a Ledger or some other hardware wallet and MetaMask and all this stuff. So I think the most important thing that we need to do as an industry right now is to just lower that friction point. And the way you do that is with education and better tools, right? Better wallets, better custody solutions, so that people have got a choice, right? Do I want to have self-custody, or do I want to store it on an exchange? And then you need to educate them on the risks of both and allow them to make their own decisions. Because at the moment, exchanges are really easy, right? You send some money to an exchange, you buy some tokens, and they sit there. Super easy. Anybody can figure that out. It's just like using a website. But the flip of that is all this complicated stuff around self-custody. So absolutely, improving both those aspects, education and tooling, is something that we're very passionate about.
Awesome, Dan. And I think we've got a question from Acti from the team. He's on the Aquarium account.
Hey, yeah. Thank you for allowing me to butt in for a minute here, because it's not every day, you speak to people like Dan that know the difference between probably, deterministic and, been in the space for. Yeah, there's people that have been in the space for a while, and I like to appreciate them, because pushing forward, pushing these products and building for years on end, which can feel like millennia probably for you. It's
Yeah.
it's really important. So my short and maybe amusing question for you is, but I'll ask this of everybody that's been around for more than a few years, right? What's been your secret sauce? How did you do it? Because I was listening from the start, so it seemed like for the first few years it was basically just you plowing on. So what got you to the point to, I don't know, to keep on going, or what was the secret, or is there a secret for it?
I think I just get very focused on a goal. I've always been that way. And I'm an extremely stubborn British guy. So if I want to get to a goal, I will get to that goal no matter what. The plus side here is that, I enjoy this work, right? I enjoy theory. I enjoy building things like this. It's stuff I've done all my life. So even though, sometimes it does feel a bit like I've been here for millennia, and some days I think, that's, crypto. Why did I join this flipping profession? Right? Why am I doing this? 99% of the time, I love it, and I can just see the potential of this space, and so I kind of feel that because it's something that I'm not too shabby at doing, right? I mean, I have a little bit of skill here, then it feels like it's a duty to try and push it forward as well. So it's just like a combination of all those things, right? I'm stubborn, I get laser focused, and I just want to build something that has some impact.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that, and in case you didn't hear it, guys, stubbornness is a virtue in crypto. So to keep that in mind. Yeah. So thank you for entertaining me. Yeah, it's great to have you on. It's amazing listening in. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for coming in, Acti. Yeah, I'm a Northern England lad as well, so yeah, I think we're quite stubborn and determined.
Yeah, just naturally, right?
We just get on with everyone. I mean, Scousers are really genuine people from Liverpool, and I just found it more easier to make friends in the north than the south, but we won't go into that.
No, let's leave that alone.
Go back to community questions. Let's see. I think we've got Ramat. You're up as a speaker. You had a question for Dan at Radix. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Okay, so I was just thinking that why did you decide to base your Scrypto development language on Rust? Why did you based it on JavaScript, Python, or Viper?
Yeah, we did actually initially investigate using JavaScript. And the appeal with JavaScript, of course, is just its insanely huge developer base, right? Everybody, like, well, everybody's probably a bit too broad, but essentially any developer at all knows some JavaScript. Any developer that you ever meet will have used JavaScript, whether they love it or hate it. At some point, they will have dabbled around in it for something. But it didn't have anywhere near the kind of stuff that we wanted to be able to provide in terms of being able to build safe smart contracts. Like, it's an untyped language. If you've ever used JavaScript, then you can probably appreciate some of the headaches that can cause you. It doesn't have kind of isolation of scope and all these other things, so that you can make sure that when I pass this token reference from this function to that function, I'm not able to keep a copy of it here and do something else with it, or pass it to another thread somewhere so that some other thread can do something at the same time, and you have contention issues and all this kind of stuff. So JavaScript is just missing so many fundamental features that we either would have to do without, or we would have to try and bake them in somehow. It just ended up not being really very viable. And so we had a kind of investigation phase around, okay, which languages could we potentially use? And after that lengthy process, Rust just came out as the clear winner.
Understood, and it also makes sense. Okay, so I was also thinking that is Radix offering any decentralized storage solution? I mean, a peer-to-peer storage solution similar to IPFS, which can be very helpful for the various apps and games being deployed on your network?
Not on our current roadmap, no. And this is where it sometimes gets a little bit confusing, because people see the research prototype that I've got running with all of this stuff stored on there, right? And it's like, oh, great, Radix is going to have some IPFS style storage solution. But that's not on the roadmap at present. It may be in the future. But one of the really tricky things with decentralized storage solutions is not so much the technical aspect of it, because as you can probably see, we've got that side of things nailed down. It's the economic aspect of it, right? It's like, okay, how much does it cost to store data? Is there an expiration period on that data? Do users have to pay rent so they can keep that data there longer? How do you incentivize validators or replicas to store that data for a period of time? How do you ensure that data still exists and the replicas, validators haven't taken the money and then deleted it anyway, for example, right? There's a lot of economic factors around incentivizing storage, and it's actually quite complicated. So the technical aspect of it is probably easier than the economic aspect of it. So for now, at least, that's not something that we're going to offer. Now, if somebody wants to come along and they figure all the economic aspects of it out, and they want to implement something like that, then that's up to them. And then I would read their economic storage paper with great interest.
Yeah, understood. Okay, final question. So regarding interoperability, I was wondering if any DApp is deployed on any other blockchain like Ethereum, how easy it is to migrate that app to your layer 1 chain, rather developing it from scratch on Shia chain?
That's a really good question. And this is something that we've done quite a lot in-house and also externally as well, with some of the developers that providing feedback and stuff to us. So I think probably the most impactful of those was taking Uniswap on Ethereum and implementing it in Scrypto. My numbers might be slightly off, but essentially there was 10% of the code required on Scrypto versus Ethereum. So if the Ethereum implementation was, say, 1,000 lines long, the Scrypto implementation was 100. So there's a huge contraction in the number of lines of code you need, and that's mainly because you don't have to build all of these constraints around assets, right? Which is what I was saying a bit earlier on in this session, because that is native to Scrypto, and you have these constraints about what you can and can't do are native to the ledger. Your developer doesn't have to build that stuff or copy paste it from somewhere into his code. So it simplifies everything. The contracts are much shorter. They're much easier to read. So yeah, we've done that many times, but there's a bunch of them. I can find a bunch of these that various people have done. Or if you go into the developer discussion, I'm sure there's plenty of people in there that can show you what they've done.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for explaining that very nicely. Thank you so much. Over to you, Glenn.
No problem. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for the question, Rahman. Let's move to Captain Levi. You had a question for Dan at Radix. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Hi, Dan. Okay,
Hi.
I just went through your white paper. I have a ton of questions that I don't even know I'll ask you yet, but I was able to frame up some. Okay, so on the white paper, I saw that Scrypto is actually based on Rust. I mean, you've talked about it, so I just asked a question. And some time ago, developers who usually use Rust, they said that they have problems with the libraries. And the next thing was also the majority of people who actually used Rust were mostly Unix users, and very few were people who use Windows. Now, why that isn't a deterministic factor, the libraries is actually important, because as libraries get updated, one of the most famous languages, which is Python, they always update their libraries. So do you guys have a team, dedicated team that always pays attention to libraries that will, cause possible compatibility problems, and then update those libraries personally?
Okay, I am going to be honest with you. That sounds a bit lower level than my Rust experience. So I would have to check up on that question and get back to you.
All right, there's no problem about that. When Glenn actually asked about the validator, you said that they needed some, specific hardware. Can you give us insight onto what hardwares they are, and are there any hardware requirements that that the owner has to keep in mind in order to, become a staker with his hardware?
Sure. So there aren't really any concrete specification requirements that we've defined. Obviously, the kind of ballpark is, say, an 8-core, 16 gig, 500 gigabyte SSD, right? That will be sufficient for you to run as a validator. Obviously, you want to have a reliable internet connection, because if your internet connection drops and you're not producing proposals to the network, then you're going to get slashed, right? So that's probably the most important aspect, is actually your internet connection, to make sure that's fast enough and it is reliable. To give you an idea, some people in the community have ran the Olympia validator nodes, which is the current network that's out there, on the Steam games console, and they've had that hooked in doing validation. So the hardware requirements are quite low, but because of the risk of, if you fall offline, you're going to get slashed, it's better to overestimate, right? In terms of Babylon, I don't expect that's going to increase by much, if any, because part of our kind of focus here is that we want our network to be able to run on commodity hardware, where you could just buy off the shelf stuff, put a validator node together, and off you go. We don't want to fall into that category of, you've got to have a 96 core node with 256 gigs of memory and rated SSDs to even perform in the network. That's not what we're heading for. So we have some recommendations around specification, but they're quite flexible.
Well, they're not just flexible; they're actually quite affordable. It's a really good one. The next question I actually have is the fact that most of the developers, if you notice, some of these projects, they just closely resemble one another. And in my experience, most guys usually just fork another project, and then make some slight changes and make some adjustments in the smart contract code. And when they fork these things, they really don't. I mean, the ability for a developer to debug is based on his experience. So you'll be seeing that the same issue that this particular project has, this other issue, this other project shares that issue. So does Radix have any development framework where possible bugs can actually be cited and then notify this developer that okay, there's a possible glitch somewhere, you might need to check this out with more detail?
Okay, yeah, I mean that kind of goes back to I think a previous question around the language itself. Rust can catch some of this stuff, but I'm guessing you're talking more about things that pass through that net, right? So it's not something that the compiler would flag, or not something that Scrypto would flag, as in you're trying to use this primitive wrong, or etc. I mean, aside from your kind of basic tool chain stuff, that's not something that we're actually developing right now. We've got quite a heavy workload in terms of getting Scrypto developed ready for Babylon. So those kind of things at the moment for us are, we'd really like to spend the time to figure out if there's solutions around some of those problems, but at the moment we just don't have the capacity to do it. So I guess at least for the medium term, we're relying more on the developer community to look at these smart contracts with the kind of guise of, with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow, essentially. It's not the ideal situation for us, but I mean, we can only do so much in terms of toolchain development.
Yeah, I completely understand. It's good that you have a lot of eyes, watching it, and I also want to thank you for, making it open source. I also hope that your son gets completely better and he feels well soon. Radix is something unique. I saved you guys white paper, and I'll be going through the white paper in detail. And I just followed you. I'll be asking you a few more questions. I really hope I wish you guys the best, and I hope the project stays bullish onward. Over to you, Glenn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you for the question, Captain Levi. Let's move to Venice. You had a question for Dan at Radix. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Glenn. I have a couple of the questions, but let's go to my first question. I read somewhere that a Radix team research division is recruiting people with focus on economics and stablecoin algorithms. So I'm curious to know that how will you recruit these people, and also tell us about your future plans to improve the Radix stablecoin algorithm and your economic model.
Okay, so stablecoins have been something that's been of interest to me for a long time, almost as long as Radix has been a project in itself. And I've always been very interested in truly algorithmic stablecoins, so not like hard pegs as such, but what would you have to do to develop a free floating class currency that is algorithmically stable, right? And so I've spent a lot of time looking at this stuff. Members of the team have spent a lot of time looking at this stuff. We got to a point where we thought, okay, if we want to be serious about a stable coin over the near future, then we need to start thinking about hiring some technical economists that can verify our ideas, poke holes in our ideas, etc. And like building a stable coin is extremely difficult, as we've seen, right? Like almost every stable coin implementation so far has had a near or a complete black swan event. So we're extremely cautious when it comes to creating a stable coin and pushing that out to market. And so we have an allocation of tokens reserved for the stable coin. So we're essentially guessing that we may need them for something. And we've given ourselves quite a long timeline to develop a stablecoin solution. And if after that timeline has passed, which I think is 9 years from now, if we haven't come up with something that we're comfortable with, that we can ensure meets the requirements of stability, the black swan events would be difficult or expensive to produce, then those token reserves will eventually get burned. But it is definitely something that I'm really interested in, and I can expand a bit more on some of the ideas and things I've tried around with in the past. if you want to send me a message, and I'll quite happily go into it with you. But conservative approach to stablecoin, because you only get one shot at developing a stablecoin.
Okay, that's completely understandable. And one more thing I want to know, that I read on your website, I read that scale will never be a bottleneck. So does the platform have a maximum of transactions or simultaneous users it can support, or do you consider it virtually infinite?
So yeah, virtually infinite. So the consensus mechanism that we have developed over these many long years is linearly scalable. So that essentially means if you throw more compute power at that problem, then you can achieve a higher throughput. And this has been verified in a number of ways, both theoretically and empirically as well. And as far as I'm aware, we're the first one to be able to crack that particular nut. We did some tests a few years ago with a previous iteration of this technology where we achieved 1.4 million transactions a second. This was done on using the Google Cloud infrastructure because they were nice and cheap. And we had 1,200 validators running across various different continents. And we simulated essentially the import of Bitcoin. So we took the Bitcoin ledger, transposed the transactions into something that we could digest, imported those transactions as quickly as we could, and then there was an explorer where you could put your Bitcoin address and you would see your Bitcoin transactions on there. And we imported the entirety of the Bitcoin blockchain at that time in, I think, just over 15 minutes, which was a peak of 1.4 million transactions a second. This current iteration of technology can go way beyond that because you have linear scalability, whereas the previous version, Tempo, it was just slightly sublinear. So there was a kind of plateau. We calculated it to be around 10 million transactions a second, whereas so far this is in the theory and empirical testing shows to be linear. So that would give you a theoretical unlimited number of transactions per second.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering my questions. And I really, while I was surfing your website and white paper, I really like the names you have in Radix, like Olympia, that is the city of statue of Zeus, and Alexandria for the city of lighthouse. So it's been really a great journey for me for reading about your project, your white paper and website. And it's been great talking with you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, we love our mythology over here, so I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for the questions, Venice. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today, but it's been great speaking to Dan from Radix. It's going to be exciting watching the future as they build more in crypto around the Radix ecosystem. Yeah, we're following that as a Whalecoin Talk team, and we've got the Telegram community and the Twitter Spaces community. If you've got any questions after this AMA, you can click on Dan's logo, and I think there's links there to the socials. We've got the socials in our Telegram as well at Whalecoin Talk. If you join the call from there, the socials are there. And where do you mainly hang out with the community, Dan? Is it Twitter, is it Discord, or is it Telegram?
Yeah, it's usually a mix of Twitter and Telegram. I've got so many damn communication channels. I mean, I just can't maintain them all. So I tend to gravitate and fly around more in Twitter and Telegram most days. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's been great speaking to you, Dan. Thanks very much for coming on today. And take care.
Problem.
And, yeah, it'll be great for us as a team and the community to follow the Radix project into the future. It looks really amazing, and it was great you could join us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Speak soon, guys.